Chapter 11 of Avatar Emergency is titled Hegemony, and I thought it would be useful to offer a definition. Hegemony in this case is referring to cultural hegemony, the process by which a dominant social class influences the cultural norms and values of the society to establish itself in the privileged position of power over the other social classes. Ulmer draws on the work of Leclau, who sees hegemony as a kind of logic, where previous areas have had the ability to draw upon a common sense maxim, that is to say, a central fixed notion that provided an apparatus for hegemonic forces to establish themselves. In today's world, no such notion exists, at least at the moment. In a society and culture as fragmented as the one we live in today, the challenge then is to try to identify and understand a logic, or perhaps unlogic, that will be able to offer a kind of stability to the hegemonic powers, and allow us to form a collective identity where presently none exists. We need to figure out how to deal with the empty universal. Quote, one group is able to attract other groups to its position, and in doing so serves as a proxy for the universal. Some particular stance of opposition against an oppressive regime, for example, does double duty in that it also represents opposition in general. End quote. In other words, as the hegemonic forces align, certain groups are attracted to the position and others may be repulsed. Those who are repulsed then form an opposition or resistance to a particular, but at the same time, in doing so, the resistance then takes on the role of the universal opposition. Another logical apparatus present in hegemony is drawn from Derrida and his notion of difference. Through difference, Derrida takes up Heidegger's notion of event, that asserts that time is not chronological. Events in the present are necessarily influenced by both the past and the future in ways that cannot be predicted. This creates the aporia, as we have been discussing in class over the course of the semester, the aporia as the unsolvable problem. But aporias demand that the future remain open, unfixed, and as a result, quote, the meaning of history as a whole, like any individual sentence, is constructed retrospectively through the displacements and delays of time, end quote. If our increasingly fractured and fragmented culture is ever to come to a universalized notion of identity, it is critical for the future to stay open. Difference provides a means to cross and connect to all pieces of our fractured society, and by following its movements, we can use conductive thinking to locate repeating signifiers that might lead us to the empty universal. Traditionally, in metaphysics, we define a trait as being the properties associated with a particular thing. In species genus analytics, things are identified by their traits, then categorized, subdivided, and sorted into this kind of thing or that. But this is done largely through negation. The traits are used to identify the thing in relation to what it is not, more so than what it is. Through approaching the world in this way, Derrida argues that metaphysicians are bad poets that create metaphors that cease to be recognizable as metaphors. This recalls Nietzsche's example of metaphors as coins that have been circulated for so long, their marking wears away and simply become slugs of metal that cease to be recognizable as coins. So entering the German term Zug as an example of the surplus of meaning that can be found in language. The term has so many meanings that if encountered in an attempt to translate, it would be next to impossible to locate with any confidence the precise meaning of the word within any particular context. Zug was then appropriated for us in the field of musicology to describe that undefinable ability of music to move us. Specifically, its power to move us through a passage as the composition progresses through its many changes in rhythm, tone, and tempo. Do we have a word to name this phenomenon? It appears not, and Zug seems to do the job nicely. Quote, Zug names a force of movement, of passage, a thought train. This is how the musical side of language supports the inference, the whole being with just an H, end quote. Zug then offers the passage through which we can move, propelled by conductive thinking, seeking out the repeating signifiers that can then reveal their meaning to us. Derrida and Ulmer turn to artist Paul Cézanne for his creativity in his works of art to illustrate how the nature of being is not confined and constrained within the construct of language, but also extends in the world of visual image as well. This is a key point as we try to transition into the world of electricity. Heidegger introduced his notion of aletheia as an alternative view of being. Being is not just that which exists, but is that which conceals, unconceals, reveals, and hides, in a perpetual oscillation between presence and unpresence. This movement in play introduces a new language where divisions of modalities fade and the multimodal emerges as a singularity. Artaud's drawings are provided as an example of a visual representation of this alternate way of conceiving being. When I look at these drawings, I am overcome by a feeling of strangeness. I see a visual representation that I cannot define. The multiplicity and surplus of meaning contained within cannot be contained within the boundaries of any one discourse. In discussing Artaud's drawings, Ulmer states, "The thought of the subjectile is carried in Artaud's performances that spill over all of the limits and conventions, the cigarette burns to the supporting medium, the repetitious stubbings of the pencil marks. It becomes the categorical image." Derrida introduces his notion of paragon as being perhaps a synonym of Zug or Cora. Derrida uses the term to describe the regions that mark off the edges of the structure in a way that allow things to take a particular kind of form, but not simply a physical form, but a conceptual or abstract form as well. It is that which is strange that either attracts or repulses us. And this is a key point. When we think of attraction, we often only think of that which pleases us, but there is another end to the axis, that which we find repugnant. Therefore, an inside and outside exists, and a kind of empty frame is created, the empty universal which can serve as a stasis point for cultural hegemony. As Ulmer puts it, a multitude is not one, not whole, W-H-O-L-E, but whole, H-O-L-E. This allows us to emerge in a passageway of the absurd, the trajectory of conduction. We can move beyond language as text, and image ontology reveals itself within the apparatus of electricity.